Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this public program. My name is Jenna Weiss. I'm the Assistant Director of Public Programs at the Jewish Museum. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to this conversation between Dal Chodha and Choghakate Kazarian, held in conjunction with the exhibition Mood of the Moment, Gaby Aghion and the House of Chloé, the first museum exhibition to honor the visionary Jewish entrepreneur Gaby Aghion and her legacy. We still have a few remaining programs coming up next month. On Tuesdays, February 6th and 13th at 2 p.m., take a virtual look at The Women Behind the Brands, which pairs the Chloé exhibition with 2015's Helena Rubinstein, Beauty is Power. And on Thursdays, February 8th and 15th at 5:30 p.m., an adult studio workshop, Making Art from Clothing, taught by artist Zahar Vox. For full details or to sign up for anything, please visit our website to sign up for our e-news too. And before I introduce our speakers, I would like to thank the rest of the curatorial team on this exhibition, led by Claudia Gould with Assistant Curator Christina Parsons. The exhibition catalog and related publications are available in the shop downstairs after the talk. And you may have noticed copies of Archivist Addendum that are generously provided for you to take home with you tonight. Now I'd like to briefly introduce our speakers. London-based writer and consultant Dal Chodha is editor-in-chief of Archivist Addendum, a publishing project that explores the gap between fashion, editorial, and academy. He contributes to various international titles, including Modern Matter, and is a contributing editor at Wallpaper magazine. Chodha has been working in leading academic institutions for more than a decade and is currently at Central St. Martin's. His first book, Show Notes, is an original hybrid of journalism, poetry, and provocation, and was released in 2020, and his second, You Gotta Keep Your Head Straight About Clothes, was released in December 2023. Chodha has lectured and chaired panel discussions for numerous institutions, including the British Fashion Council, the V&A, the International Library of Fashion Research, and the Courtauld. And Choghakate Kazarian is an Armenian-born French curator and art historian, now based in New York City. She was formerly curator at the Musée d'Art Moderne de Paris and taught at the École de Louvre. She has curated exhibitions on artists such as Lucio Fontana, Piero Manzoni, Carol Apple, and Henry Darger, with accompanying exhibition catalogs, and has written extensively on post-war, contemporary, and outsider art. Now, please take a moment to silence your cell phones and join me in welcoming Dal Chodha and Choghakate Kazarian.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I hope you got a chance to see the exhibition and somehow got in the mood of this moment. So before I start questioning Dal, and I just wanted to make a quick introduction to how I got to be interested in archival fashion and in Dal's work. So when I was preparing the exhibition that you have seen tonight and the book that was published at this opportunity, my first thought was, how are we going to show these clothes? Because usually when you create a show, you don't have much choice in terms of photography because you borrow things from different places and the lender usually just sent you a photograph from different qualities, different styles, and then the graphic designer has to think about how to bring some homogeneity to this. However, I was in this very unique and extraordinary situation where 99% of what was presented in the show came from one lender, the Chloé archive. So, which meant that we had the possibility to present the photography, photographed by the same photographer following the same artistic direction. So I thought, how should we do that? I was used to photographies of painting, sculpture, although there are many different options, but with clothes it's much more difficult because it's three-dimensional, it moves, it can be presented in so many different ways. So my first thought was just to look at what has been done before. And so the first publication realized by Chloé displayed the history of the house, showing the garments through magazine editorials, archival photos, which are beautiful photographs, but you see more of the model and the artistic direction, the hair, the makeup, everything, but you don't see so much the clothes. And I wanted this book to be obviously a beautiful book, but also something, a scholarly publication that gives you information about the garments that are photographed, which you don't always have in such photographs. So I looked into different other books, and I wanted to find a balance between something aesthetically satisfying, but also informative, that could be used as a tool for different scholars. And it was even more important than that in this situation, because the exhibition and the book were the first museum organized exhibition that was not commissioned by Chloé, but came from an independent point of view. So I looked into great examples of exhibition books as the catalog for Madame Gray. It was obviously amazingly beautiful, but it was a beautiful image that looked like a drawing and gave little information about the physicality and the materiality of the garment. Same with this book, Balenciaga, L'œuvre noire. I'm giving you these two examples because the exhibitions were probably the most beautiful I've ever seen, and so are the books. So these are good examples I'm giving you, but they were not satisfying for me, because obviously with Balenciaga, people somehow know about these garments. They have been photographed and seen and written about. But for Chloé, it was not the case. They have never been photographed for themselves. So I needed to find another solution. The images I've used as just working material were the photographs provided by the Chloé archive that they did themselves, and this is how they were. Well, I won't say anything about the hollow gray background. Exactly. Obviously, there are many issues with these photographs. They were very useful as working tools, but aesthetically not satisfying for many obvious reasons I don't need to mention here. So I asked them, do you have other options? And they told me that they experimented with flat photography, which was an option I was very much interested in at first. They sent me these pictures that were much more satisfying aesthetically, but they have been contoured, there's no background, so they were too flattened. They felt really like images, and I didn't have that physicality of the image, the materiality of the garments. The epiphanic moment for me came when I was visiting the Chloé archive in Paris, as you can see in the image on the left. And when the archivist was just pulling these garments from the closet, I realized, oh my God, this is what I want. I want to show the garments unstyled, which was something very important to me, to kind of differentiate from editorials and also to show the garments as they are physically. And so that's how I decided to photograph them on a hanger, on a wall, and not to style them. I like this example because you can see the belt. I prefer to just present it exactly as it was in the storage, and not to belt it in the center. On the right, you can see the photo shoot in situation where the photographer has created that kind of white box to photograph it. It took obviously a long time of preparation, and my inspiration somehow came conceptually. So the visual inspiration was the Chloé storage itself, but more conceptually, the inspiration came from the artist Franz Erhard Walter, who does this kind of artworks made of different garments, if we may say, that are used for performances. However, when they're not used as performance tools, they're displayed as installations, as you can see here. And the artist called that, he says his works are in a storage state, which was very interesting to me and as a good example for the way I wanted to photograph the garments. So this is the photography that appears in the book. Which was also interesting is you can see the label and how it is, which is something you never see in magazines or in advertisement that tend to be very sleek and polished. And here you can see the materiality, how the garments behave. They can be soft, slushy. And here for the dress on the right, I prefer to not style, as I was saying, but to present the scarf just hanging on a nail. And also in a certain way to accentuate the flatness, which is something very important to the Chloé silhouette that is made of these garments that are very light and basically have no lining. And in a way, the photography and the experience of the photo shoot was also kind of my inspiration for the way I wanted to present the garments, as flat as possible on a hanger, to kind of emphasize that lightness and their archival state. Another display system we adopted for photography, that was Julien Hamon's idea, was to photograph some of the garments, the transparent ones, on a lightbox table. To be honest, when he presented that idea, I was very skeptical, a lot. I thought it would be too gimmicky, too kitsch, and not give enough information about the garments. But he was very insistent, and usually an artist, when he's very enthusiastic about something, usually I think you can trust them. So I said, okay, let's give it a try. And so we tested it, and it worked so well for all the garments that were transparent, and brought something very interesting, because a lot of these garments are kind of old-looking, retro, and a lot of these blouses could easily look like grandma's curtains. And photographing them this way gave them a sort of X-ray, more modernist aesthetic that was very interesting, and also allowed us to kind of highlight the construction of the garment. Obviously, that's something that could only work in a book and as an image, and for the exhibition, obviously, I've adopted a different display option. And while during the photo shoot, I had this discussion with the photographer, Julien Hamon, and was very surprised in the way we were handling these garments with, you know, white gloves. There were certain things we were allowed to do and not to do as any archival collection. And he told me, you know what? A few years ago, I photographed the same Chloé archive on living models wearing makeup for the Archivist. I said, very curious, and this is the book you can see here, and it's still shocking for me to see these same garments that we handled with white gloves being photographed on living models. So I get curious about Dal's work. So you co-founded with Jane Howard the Archivist, called now Archivist Addendum. Maybe you can say a few words about the whole project behind it, how it evolved.
Yes, I can. Thanks for that. What's been really interesting is going around the exhibition and looking at a lot of the garments that you can see in the issue that we treated in a completely different way. And in lots of ways, this kind of publication in your hands is a bit of a time capsule. This is only from 2017, but in that short space of time, how differently the word archive and archives in general are treated, discussed, broken down, fetishized. It's completely changed. And I think that's what's so exciting and always was exciting and is exciting about Archivist as a project. So Jane's idea with Archivist when she founded it was to really kind of look at that gap between your wardrobe or the things that you have at home or the things that in museum collections that never really get seen, and what happens in a museum display. There's a kind of gap in the middle. And you know, you will know many of the problems with fashion exhibitions is how the garments often look like ghosts. You know, there's always half a story being told because they're not really being seen in the way that we want them to be seen. There have been lots of attempts at mannequins kind of coming to life or being, you know, shaped differently to sort of rectify some of those. And Judith Clark, the fantastic curator, was working on a show for Chloé at their new head office and sort of said, you know, it'd be really nice for us to respond to the archive in print as we do, and in the way that we do, which is to put it back on the body. And looking back through this now and seeing the garments here that are presented in this kind of very still, very beautiful way, I'm amazed that we were really allowed to get away with what we did, but also very proud that we did, because everything's really changed. You know, as we were talking
now
about.
it's not allowed anymore to photograph it on living models.
And I love the idea. I mean, one of the things I always think about is there's a Juicy Couture tracksuit in the V&A permanent fashion collection, and it's been in there for a long, long, long time. It actually went into it, I can't even remember the exact date, but it went into it as a Juicy Couture tracksuit was also in magazines and worn by celebrities. And I remember at the time seeing it and thinking this was really strange. I kind of didn't really have a proper handle on, you know, the stuff that I do now, thinking, well, why is that in there? Who decided for that to be in there? And what place does that have in there? Because to me at that point, along, you know, maybe 15 years ago, I expected museum collections to only hold the things that were really exquisitely made, or things that were perfectly rare, or things that had stories to them. But of course, all fashion, all garments, whether we like it or not, actually, they're all telling different kinds of stories. And that Juicy Couture tracksuit really sort of helps encapsulate the way I feel about archives now, which is that everything has some kind of relevance or permanence, and the things that we see presented in the way that we're looking at the Chloé exhibition here is only a small snapshot of everything else that you have or that's worthy of looking at. And that's another thing about archivists, is that putting these clothes on the body, getting the opportunity to put them on different types of women, which at this point, Chloé as a brand, I think that's what's so staggering about when you see pictures of Gaby herself. The brand that we know is pretty much, we mentioned earlier that you thought it was a British brand, years ago, because it was kind of white and blonde. That's kind of it. Post Stella McCartney, you had a succession of 4 creative directors that all kind of looked the same. And Chloe's kind of iconic imagery for most of us here will be perfume campaigns. It's always a kind of blonde girl running down the street away from something or towards something. We never know. So there's always that sort of strange tension.
That's the image I had, especially this campaign by Ines and Vinod done on the Phoebe file. So for me, it was always like a British brand. That's the image I had, and made for skinny blonde girls, British girls, yes.
And skinny blonde British girls have lots of other things to wear as well, so they're okay. But so there's something about Gaby's image herself, her culture, her race, her stories, that really, without being too, it felt like it had been erased over time. And I think, we were very adamant that this one girl that you can see in here, Jess PW is her name, that people from the team were very insistent that we used her because she sort of fit the marketing mold of what Chloé was, but we were very adamant to also diversify that in a small way. I'm not up here thinking that we've gone, these are 4 beautiful, thin women, so it's not really that we're not doing that much in terms of political activism, but it's a small nudge towards trying to get the archive shown on different people in different ways to dismantle perhaps some of the ways we have been marketed to. And I think this issue here what's also very interesting is that when you're working on anything, those of you that are students, the kind of drama, the pain, the anxiety, the problems of your projects, they never really come to light. But this was a horrendous 2-day shoot in a very, very, very hot Paris with Jane's sort of 6-month-old baby crying near the head office, and all of the people from the head office complaining that there was a baby anywhere near them. And we had these 4 models who kept sitting down in these clothes, who, were...
These are some of the images of the making of.
These are some of the, yes, exactly. Just me trying to capture what was happening. So these images are just me on my phone, just remembering what we were shooting, because it was moving so fast. I think we shot something like 60 looks over 2 days, which is insane, even if you're doing a kind of lookbook or contemporary clothes, let alone mixing seasons, just grabbing things, pulling a rail all the way down the street, covered in Tyvek. All of these things that Geraldine herself, I remember at the beginning of the shoot, and when we were having discussions, so Geraldine is the archivist at Chloé. She, we were having discussions about bodysuits and pads and things that would mean that the garments wouldn't actually touch much of the body, so making sure all the models were wearing essentially second skins underneath. But a lot of the clothes are very sheer, unlined, so that we realized wouldn't work really quickly. And actually, once the rhythm of the shoot got to what it was, and also Julien, who shot all of this, it was the first time we would work with him, and I think the first time we'd ever really done anything this big. And he also shoots on film, so you can imagine how it felt having these 4 models, a crying baby, builders, because this was a building site, and also a photographer who didn't really speak to us much, and was shooting on film. So I couldn't really...
He's very silent.
He's very silent, very talented, but very silent.
And efficient.
I couldn't see what was happening. So I had no idea if we were getting the pictures we needed. I had no idea. And that's the weird thing about Archivist as a project is Jane and I are not very productive, but when we do work, we always make it as hard as possible, meaning that we work often with photographers who use film. And that's not in a way, that's not even driven by any kind of aesthetic. I don't know how it happens, it just does. But working with photographers or image makers who kind of cut you out of the process in the best possible ways, as you mentioned earlier, is all about trust. And this project for me, like any archival project, is about trust. First we have to get the trust of the archivist to allow us to handle these garments and do pretty much what we want to do with them. And that's what's very exciting, but also terrifying.
Yeah, I think in a way I was also lucky because the archivist Géraldine Sommier kind of liked also to experiment and to think of how do you display garments. And I know she worked for a year to help me imagine the display system and the exhibition and go beyond the creepy mannequin with heads and arms and feet, and just to find this kind of effortless look and to display garments differently. And
how long did it take to decide on the hangers?
Oh my God, I'm sure if there are people who worked on the show in the room, we all have a hanger trauma, because, well, for the photo shoot, so the first day I came in, we were just working on the display and accessories, and the main accessory for my photo shoot was the hanger, the main star. So he had picked up already like 12 different hangers, and I looked with the photographer at different options. None of them worked, because something I had never thought of before is that actually hangers, they're unisex. And do you know what unisex means? And it means just for men, that is marketed at women. That's as garments. So all hangers you have, they're actually men's size. They're very large, and they correspond also to male aesthetic of more horizontal shoulders, while these garments are made...
You did not think you were going to attend a lecture about patriarchal hangers.
Oh my God, I can speak. Too bad I haven't brought the images. I have so many photos of I made a whole mood board with hangers for the photo shoot. And so we had to actually have a hanger made, custom made in brass, handmade, which had these very small shoulders that corresponded to the size of the clothes. They're small clothes, as you have noticed. And also to have this kind of exaggerated, like very, very triangular shoulders that kind of accentuated the elongated silhouette we had. So,
I mean, and I think that's one of the staggering things about exhibition making, is that level of detail that no one really, not that people would notice if it was wrong, basically, but they don't notice when it's right. And that was the thing I was thinking about going through it, is also thinking about the hanger, like what's a Chloé hanger? Chloé has been through so many different types of aesthetics over the periods. It's had different people at the helm. Most people know it for Karl Lagerfeld's kind of, I guess, more campy, cartoonish kind of work. But what kind of hanger, I guess, really helps to... What kind of hanger can you hang that legacy off of? And that's what really kind of struck me about your show.
But I needed also to be more homogeneous to kind of emphasize the lightness, and also just to say that this is not on a real body, and I don't want to recreate the body and to pretend it's on a real body. And thinking of just how to look at these garments from different periods, I was interested in what you said, that basically most Chloé campaigns have been seen on blonde women, and you try to diversify. And this is something I really noticed when looking at the Archivist, because the same garments, which are garments, for instance, from the 70s, they've never been photographed on these such models, but they've been all photographed on the same type of models. So just kind of bring them to a different aesthetic.
Because also, I guess Chloé is it's about being French and Frenchness. And, Emmanuel on the left is French, so this idea of what looks French, what's the French idea, Paris, you grew up there, all of these kind of things, I guess, you're not consciously, I'm in my own work and everything that I do, I'm not consciously trying to dismantle anything really, because I'm not destructive in my nature normally, but I guess what I'm trying to do is always think about what we already know and what visuals we already have, and I'm not interested in contributing to an already very, very, vast selection of the same thing. I guess you have to twist something, you have to turn something, and it's really sad to me, actually, that, by just photographing non-white people, that's somehow doing something. I think that's deeply tragic. We seem to celebrate it a lot, but we should really be kind of further than that. But I think for brands as well, brands who are so heavily marketed and, strategized, and there are spreadsheets about everything, for us to do this with a brand like Chloé is pretty exciting, because it does mean that I don't really care what kind of girl you're trying to sell to at the moment. This is what we're interested in expressing. And to us, again, and Judith Clark, it's about femininities. You know, Chloé is about multiple femininities. And so there needs to be a way of kind of doing that. If we'd had more time, if we'd had more budget, we could have pushed that a lot more than we've managed to do. But as a sort of time capsule, I think of how these clothes behave. Also, another thing that Jane's really interested in, and myself included, is making sure that these garments look relevant to today. So
that's a big issue, I think, also in curating the show. How do you show this garment that doesn't just look outdated but kind of embodies the mood of that decade, but still relevant today?
Yeah, and you know, when in a printed publication, especially, you know, you're killing trees, you're putting ink into the planet. There's lots of things that you're doing that are incredibly serious. So you have to really think about what you are saying. And with a lot of these images, what we really wanted to do was sort of, I guess, put that contemporary fashion magazine thing upside down and actually make people look at these images and think, I really love that dress. Where can I get it from? And then realize that it's not available, and it hasn't been available for sort of 20 or 30 years. And this dress that Jess is wearing, the beige one, which is a remake of an original from 1950?
1960. It's in the first room.
Here, is an amazing example of something that just looks like an amazing outfit today. And I think for us, when we were dressing the models, it was very much like looking at them and making sure they also didn't look like they were wearing costume, or they didn't look like they were wearing an old garment, you know. And a lot of that is easier to do with a body, because, you know, their faces, the hair, the makeup, the setting is what lends a certain freshness, which I guess is difficult to do because in an exhibition setting like yours, you're kind of isolating all of those things to just the design. So you then start thinking, you know, there's some pictures in there of all the beautiful 70s kind of stuff that actually looks much more contemporary, I think, in the way we've shot it than it might if you just looked at it on a mannequin.
But it's also interesting what you said about Chloé having this image of blonde girls and what it means to be Parisian. And when you look at the history, it's a French brand that sold kind of Parisian style, but it has been founded by an Egyptian Jew. And almost all the creative directors have been foreigners. And I think in a certain way, it corresponds more to what is Paris, actually. Like, it's a very diverse city. And contrary to this image of the Parisienne that is sold, and if you have the chance to read the exhibition book, I mean, Alexis Romano wrote this beautiful essay about how Chloé marketed this image of this universal Parisienne that could be basically anyone. So that's an interesting. I love this picture. I guess it's in the Chloé headquarters, probably. This is a blouse that is by Phoebe Philo that is in the room, and I remember how much time we spent and money, obviously, to just kind of properly prepare that blouse for the show. Oh. And here it's just worn by someone.
Yeah, it probably still has her makeup stains on it. We did try to not
that
have
was
that
very
on there,
shocking to me.
But some of those might have been ours. Yeah, I mean, again, we wanted to have that iconic image of, you know, what Chloé was, which is a jean and a sort of blouse, which is very much, you know, from Stella's period onwards, I guess, what is iconic about it. So just the simplicity, I think that is what is also really interesting about archival fashion, and particularly a brand like Chloé, is that not all the things in the show or in the magazine, or the book or publication, they're not all showpieces. So it talks more about what is worth photographing. You know, the big ball gowns, I'm not interested in working with Dior's archives or any of these.
Interested in juicy couture.
I
can
would
feel
much
that.
rather.
I know.
Well,
that will be the
Balenciaga
next
doing a good job at
archivist.
that.
Justin.
But I'm much more interested. Yeah, I'm much more interested in actually your, like, you know, your clothes, basically, what you wear. And I think that's the big kind of part of the puzzle that's missing a lot in publishing, is that everybody, when they do these big archival shoots, it's of all these kind of huge statements, but these are dresses often that are worn once, if at all. They're not paid for by anybody. No one's actually lived in them. Whereas here, there were lots of things with stains on, and, you know, we've done projects with other archives before where the garments have cigarette burns in them, and because their clothes should have lives. And I think so often a lot of our work when working with archives is almost erasing that, pretending, steaming it, repairing it, making it look really fresh, but actually the sort of damage that happens with fabric and textile, I think, is really important. And there's a show on at MoMU in Antwerp at the moment that I haven't seen, that is all about the damaged clothes in their archives, the things that are rotting, the things that are breaking. You know, a lot of plastic and PVC that was introduced in the 60s isn't surviving. It's literally kind of flaking away in rooms in tissue paper. And I love that stuff, because that's really, I love ephemerality. Despite making this kind of beautiful looking thing, I'd be happy if you read it and put it in the bin, as long as you recycled it. Which sounds bizarre, but I think the joy for me is in the making of it, is in the sharing of it. But I can't tell you what to do with it. You know, you need to respond to it yourself. And I think a lot of, when you're looking at archives, it is about responding to it through your own story, rather than applying a story on top.
That's true. Speaking of how do you make an archive alive and contemporary, recently I was fascinated by this very unusual experience in Paris. As you know, museums' collection have standards. And when the Musée Galliera hired a new director, Olivier Saillard, who since then left, had decided to use the museum's collection in a very bold new way. So he staged a performance with Tilda Swinton. Sorry, it's a very bad quality video, but that's all I could find. So basically she was just walking, holding these garments, and you can see him on the right, just holding on a plate, and both have gloves. Kind of restaging a sort of runway show with the museum's collection. So she's not.
Do you like it?
You know, I've never seen them in real. I've only seen the video, not the actual thing. Everybody who saw it, I don't know if you had the chance to see these performances, or if you have any opinion about the way it's shown.
I love the Zoolander-ish quality of it. It's so stupid and absurd and camp, and yeah, it's just really naff. And I love it for that. I think it's someone having fun. And I think so much of fashion isn't fun, or isn't presented as being fun.
I agree with you. That was my surprise. You know, I come from modern contemporary art, and actually I realized people in art are a bit more fun than in fashion, which was a big surprise to me. I thought fashion was more fun.
But there's a real stillness, I think, to the way we look and talk about fashion now, and the way it's presented, and the way it's kind of, we know about its problems and we know about its ills, but actually someone just having some fun with it. I mean, and I guess there's something about this that, yes, you probably had to be in the room to really, for it to kind of translate, and there's something wonderful in that. And the performative element of this is just funny. I mean, it's obviously somebody, I think Olivier loves fashion. In all of it's not just clothes. And I think there is now this distinction with people that say they love fashion. I think they love bits of it. They don't love it all. I love all of fashion, all of its problems, all of its idiocies, all of its fabulousness. I can handle all of it. And I think performances like this probably encapsulate this much better than a dry museum presentation in some ways. But I don't think this is really about objects. This is about fashion in a different kind of way.
Speaking of another unusual use of archival garment, well, I'm sure everybody heard of this.
The audience has feelings on this. Maybe we should open it up. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, before even starting to thinking about whether she should have worn an archival dress or not, I'm kind of thinking, all this for this, the result is so disappointing that it was not worth it to start with. The other question is, first of all, it's not exactly a real museum collection in a certain way. Let's not forget about that. What's the name? It's Believe It or Not. Is that the name of
Ripley's Believe It or Not.
Yes. So it's just a commercial structure. So there's nothing that forbids them to make certain use of this dress to start with. So for me, it was not like, touching this sort of sacred thing. It's not the Met's collection. So in terms of status, why not? And basically when the dress went to auction, anybody could have bought it and worn it. And, in terms of status, it's not intrinsic to the dress, but more who owns it. So.
But that's what I love about what you're saying, is you're exemplifying, I guess, the hierarchy involved in museum collections of it's not the Met's. If it was the Met, somehow we would take this more seriously. And I think that's what I love thinking about, is actually who decides what's more serious? It's an iconic dress. And in some ways, maybe this presentation of it is just the same as what we've just watched with Tilda Swinton. To me, it kind of is. It's almost the same as what we've done with Archivist, actually. I think the issues I have with this is how, the damage that may or may not have happened, depending on what Instagram account you're following.
It's almost like a conspiracy theory.
Exactly. How many sequins were torn off because of Kim's bottom? All of that stuff is... but I think that is fashion to me. It's part of the culture now. I think what's interesting is that, Kim being in this dress just allowed more and more people to comment on her body. And I think that's ultimately what it was doing, which we could argue is what Marilyn had
because
to
of the weight
suffer
loss
from.
that she had to go through to fit
Because
in
of
that
the, yeah, and
dress,
that for me was the most depressing thing about it. I mean, the dress, whatever, it is what it is. But the way that it was, the way that you had this very important kind of public figure talking about how she had to lose weight to get into it, I thought was deeply sad, because the amount of people that listened to her, I just thought, really, are we still kind of perpetuating that message? And for what? You're right, this kind of quite kind of flat. And also the idea that she didn't see it all the way through. She only wore it up the stairs and then got changed. So, but it changed into, I think, this one that looked...
a replica, which she could have worn to begin with, also another question.
Yeah, but what I loved is that it's asked a new audience to think about old stuff, which we love, but actually, the term archive as well, I think, is completely misused now. I have so many students who tell me they have an archive of stuff, which is just a box of stuff. It's not an archive, it's just stuff. And we all have that box, but we don't all have archives. And so kind of shaping that stuff into an archive is obviously important, but not necessarily important to everybody. So I think now there's an interesting kind of way that we think about archives. And I think this presentation of this dress probably just got more people thinking about old stuff, but also people who maybe had never really heard or thought about Marilyn Monroe before may have been introduced to her. So in some ways, it's an academic statement.
Oh, okay. That's a good way to define it. But I agree with you. There's a matter of status, and I think when you're facing an artwork like fine arts, a painting, it's very clear what it is and how you can, deal with it physically. But for garments, it's very different. For instance, the shirt I'm wearing, you have the same in the exhibition. So what's the difference? I just wash it and treat it badly. And we spent so much money, and we had conservators handling it to display it in the actual exhibition. And I'm technically allowed to just throw it away. While if I had a painting, I'm legally not allowed to destroy it. So it's a matter of different status and to switch.
It's also about care, right? That's what
Yes.
we're kind of talking about.
They want to preserve it or not.
The hope is that archivists or museums care for things more than we do. But I think that's changing also. I think a lot of young people, I see a lot of students I know that buy or spend money on a thing. They buy it with the knowledge that they're going to keep it forever, for a long time.
I don't have that.
No,
I guess it's
don't
because
either.
I have that thought in my work. For when it comes to my personal clothes, I don't keep them.
No, you don't keep them.
No, I think that's just a reaction to my work, probably.
Do you resell them?
I just donate them or just put it in the street. I mean, when I was in Paris, I was just putting it in a bag and just put it on the street, and an hour later, somebody just took it.
Well, we should all move outside your flat. I think because also I'm coming, the culture of reselling is massive. It's huge. So the archive is now, someone's mum's old Chloé Paddington bag
yes.
is on Depop or whatever. And so there's an interesting kind of new ecosystem to what would once may have been called archival fashion. And I wonder if there's now a sense of people keeping their archival fashion rather than thinking about donating it to an institution, because also what we always forget is that institutions have very little space. So quite often, they're rejecting things because they can't put it anywhere. And that's also what I love about our jobs is it's stuff. It takes up room in the world, takes up space in rooms and places. And I think quite often the way we consume visual culture, especially today, we forget that. We just think everything's a picture, but it's a picture of a physical thing, and that physical thing has to live somewhere. So this dress must be stored in some incredible contraption or box, or there's a lot of tissue paper that's keeping this dress safe, and you can imagine how many more there are. So for me, it is about, it's about care.
Speaking of care, it's so funny that there was such a scandal with this dress, while a year later, when people were just wearing archival Karl Lagerfeld, nobody talked about it. Concerning Chloé, what was also interesting, I think, is that so the dress you see on the left that is presented in this exhibition here was kind of recreated by the Chloé studio for their guest at the Met Gala. It's sort of reinterpretation of that archival dress.
It's the one on the cover as well.
Yes, that was very interesting that you chose that. And another example that is also, I think, interesting in terms of archive and recreation. So on the left, you can see the Chloé runway. In the middle, it's the making of for the archivist. So only the top has been preserved, and my guess is that the skirt has probably never even been produced or was lost, because it's a fragile lace skirt. And so when I decided to present the top in the exhibition, Géraldine, the Chloé archivist, said, you know what, I have started this project to recreate the skirt, just based on photographs. And would you be interested in displaying it in the exhibition? So first I was a bit reluctant. I'm very attached as a curator to the sense of originality, authenticity. And usually I just accept garments as they are. If they're lost, they're lost. I don't want to recreate that and just show whatever exists. However, I made an exception for this particular piece because it was so much part of the whole meaning of the top, because of this kind of juxtaposition between something that comes from sports world and something more like underwear and sexy. And having this clash of two different styles was so meaningful to this outfit that I felt like having this kind of completed the meaning of the top. So that's also another thing that happens a lot, even in fine arts, to kind of recreate something that has been lost.
I'm with you, though. I quite like the things that are missing, you know. I think because it's missing, it tells us something. No one cared for it, or it wasn't that important. You know, quite often I've just interviewed, or there's a new book coming out about archives later next month, I think, published by Rizzoli and edited by Alex Carl. And I interviewed somebody who owns a huge collection of Mugler, and she spends a lot of her time trying to find things online through people who used to work at the atelier, and she has so many bits that were showpieces, so they're incredibly badly made, like a lot of cuffs and accessories, and they sort of still have tape on them. They're sort of stapled together,
like all prototypes.
Yeah, they were literally only meant to walk down the show, and then that's it. Someone put them in a box, and she's got all these amazing pieces, and that was much more exciting to me than looking at the iconic kind of tailoring, because you know, it was the thing that wasn't meant to be kept. It was the thing that was meant to just be a picture. And I think there's something in that too that's really fascinating. Yeah, that's the thing that in the Chloé archive, the things that were remade as well, I sort of felt a bit sad about. You know, I just thought, oh right, so it's not the actual thing, is it? It's a remake of a thing, so it's not. Yeah, it's a strange thing, but I think those gaps in archives, I think, are really fascinating. Of course, those gaps are often political, but I think there is sometimes with something like this, it's like an original kind of punk outfit. You know, a good one doesn't exist anymore because it didn't survive the period. So any of those other things you see now that you know pertain to be punk T-shirts, I don't know how punky they are. They were probably bought by someone quite wealthy that just liked it and wore it once. But did it live? Did it kind of have blood on it? Did it have sweat on it? Did it have holes in it because of the fun?
Like armors in museums. Most of the ones we see, they've never been used. They're just prestige collections. They were made for, you know, presentations, not for actual war situation.
Yeah, and also metal armor, you often only see it on quite stiff bodies, but of course it's articulated so that you can kill people wearing them. So that's kind of got a strange history as well, the history of the presentation of clothes. You know, that stiffness is really what we're all trying to kind of, I guess, unpack.
Before we run out of time, I wanted to entirely go in a different direction now and move from images to actual words.
No one reads.
No one reads now. I know, especially in the fashion industry, it's all so much more about images than, I mean, it has always been, but now more than ever, because of the situation of the world in general. So maybe you could say a few words about your book, Show Notes.
Yes, I can.
And it's words, and how it's made of words.
I like words, and even with Archivist, there's what we've been allowed to do, not so much with this issue, but others, is publish sort of academic texts. And we were laughing earlier, but you're currently doing your PhD, which you will finish soon, I'm sure. When people work so hard on an academic piece of writing, it just lives on your computer, maybe, or under your bed for most of the time after you finished it. So this idea of using words and fashion and actually stripping it away from images was really important to me. I have spent, at this point in 2020, 4 years covering the menswear shows for Wallpaper magazine, which again is incredibly challenging, partly because you're often writing late at night or early in the morning. You may have had some beverages that change how you're thinking about things. You're exhausted. You don't even know what you've seen. You need someone to tell you what you've seen. And that's not because you can't remember, it's because quite a lot of what you've seen is not remarkable. So what I found was that a lot of the kind of things that I had published, there were sort of refracted statements and notes that I'd written in my phone that almost took on a new life. And I thought it would be an interesting experiment to throw them together into this kind of concrete poem long form thing. I don't know what it is, but it was fun to do as an exercise, and it's something that I still do often now, is to really try and isolate texts that I'm seeing. I'm working on a project for the new issue of Discourse magazine that will be out later this year, doing the same with all this Spring Summer 24 press releases, and just trying to isolate them all to one sentence or one word or one description, to try and understand what perhaps the sort of marketing machine behind fashion is actually trying to tell us. So this was my experiment, and it was quite fun.
I thought it was very exciting, also thinking of a larger tradition of words in fashion, because Roland Barthes' book about fashion is based on that, the way there's a specific vocabulary to fashion that he was fascinated about. So he built all his philosophy of fashion based on words. So for me, it was very interesting how you kind of continue, in different way, that tradition of description. Using words to describe garments.
You look at vintage older magazines, the fabulous kind of Vreeland-esque magazines with the really evocative descriptions of where to wear this dress and what to do in it, and all of that stuff. We've completely lost it and have replaced it with photographs. This is kind of, I guess, my plea to try and encourage some people to want to get that back.
Maybe you can say a word about your most recent book. That is about clothes.
It is. So this is, you got to keep
There's an interesting story behind it.
You've got to keep your head straight about clothes, which is available in printed matter, I've just found out, which is nice. I was commissioned by a store and publisher in London called Tender Books to write something. That was the commission.
That's quite a luxury.
And terrifying, because,
It is.
It's, I don't have ideas. I think that's what people have, this idea that you are full and brimming with loads of ideas and concepts. I have quite an empty brain most of the time, because the things in my brain are being used a lot, meaning that in my day-to-day job as teaching at St Martin's, I've got a student here, Katie, you are constantly sort of coming up with ideas and then delivering them out to other people in a very exciting way, but it doesn't mean your brain is constantly, and the academics in the room will know what I mean. It has to regenerate overnight, so it has to kind of recharge. So when someone does give you the luxury of do whatever you want, it's really terrifying. This was published as a series of, as part of a series of artist books too, so that also threw me, because I'm not an artist and I don't think think of myself as one. So I struggled for a very long time working out what to do, and then I suddenly remembered or looked over at my bookshelf and saw a copy of Cheap Chic, which is on the next slide, which is a book published in 1975 in New York. It's a kind of textbook about thrift store shopping, which is, it's just the most wonderful.
It was before the Real.
Before the Real and Vestiaire and all those people. It's the most charming, incredible thing. Again, it's a textbook, basically, like a kind of, how do you do this? Which was very much the fashion in 70s publishing, particularly in the States, about how do I cook? How do I do this? It's a how-to guide. But what I loved about Cheap Chic is the tone of voice. It doesn't talk down to anybody. It doesn't tell you need to be rich or thin or beautiful or any of those things. It's just very real. And at that point in 75, the world was challenging. There were economic challenges, particularly in the States. And this book responded to that. So if you don't have a lot of money, how are you going to buy clothes? don't spend a lot of money on them. So it came up with all these tips, and I went to interview Christophe Lemaire, the designer, in his Paris studio in 2010, and he just kind of told me about this book. It was on the table as we were speaking. And from that moment, on the way home, I remember buying it on Amazon, on the Eurostar. And since then, it's become this thing that I regularly pick up and look at when I am a bit stuck about how to start a piece, what to say, what to think, just to flick through. But more particularly, my book talks more about my copy of Cheap Chic, which is completely battered, and it has crayon drawings on it on certain pages. Cher's face is kind of...
It has a life.
There's a picture of Cher in it, which is incredible, and it's just covered in brown scribbles. It has a life as a material object. So this kind of text that I wrote, again, I have no idea what it is. Is it an essay? Is it a text? I don't know. It's words on a page. They very much, it speaks about not only Cheap Chic and my philosophy on clothes and dressing and fashion, but also about how important physical books and physical things are to me and maybe to some of you. So it's a really weird thing that I'm very pleased people will see.
Jenna, do we have time, or should we open to Q&A? Let's open to Q&A.
We can open to Q&A.
Okay, I'm putting up the last
That was
slide
the
just
politest
as an
no, you
inspiration.
don't have
We can
time
open
I've
to
ever
Q&A.
heard.
I just put that as a sort of mantra, although I don't agree with that.
Which one? You don't agree
That
with?
classics are their
Oh,
last.
do the next. They can't see that. But do the next slide.
No, I love it. Oh, wait, this one.
You don't agree with that?
But I'd
That's
rather
from
open.
the book. That's not me. Yeah.
But I think we should just open to Q&A.
Hi. Two quick questions, and one is, did Chloé do pants before Stella McCartney? And did they?
They
I
did
don't know.
pants, yes, absolutely.
They did.
This is not something I have displayed. There's only maybe a couple of trousers in the show. In general, this is something you don't see so much in exhibitions because they're very difficult to display. And that's another principle I have in general. I try to choose garments that are that could be displayed in a proper way and still express themselves. Some garments are very difficult. You see them less because they're easy to show on the actual body than in a display system of an exhibition. But yes, they did a lot.
And then quickly, seem to be several different versions of the Archivist. Was it done,
Yeah, so we have done 4 issues. So one of them was on Hussein Chalayan, who I think was on one of the slides earlier, and the other 2 are kind of more general. One looks at the archive of Shelley Fox, who's here with us, very exciting. So there's lots of different expressions, I guess, of this idea of looking at archives and making them hopefully look contemporary. This is the first time we'd worked directly with a brand as well, so Chloé supported this because it was part of an exhibition that they had at their head office. So that changed things, that complicated things, but no, there are 4 different editions.
Hi, thank you for your talk. It was really great. I mean, as the both of you are specialists in archives and have dealt with looking through them and really just seeing how they've carried on their influence throughout time, I'm wondering, do you think this ties in sort of like in conjunction with sustainability within fashion, and how do you see that progressing in the future?
Absolutely. I mean, Cheap Chic also is why it's quite timely to know about it, is because that's essentially what it's saying. It's saying, why are you buying new clothes every season? Work out what you want to look like and try and make that sustainable as possible, meaning that, rework what you own, perhaps buy less is the mantra that we're kind of told today. I always struggle, though, with this kind of topic of don't struggle with the topic of sustainability, but I think it's always really complicated when people talk about it in fashion, because I think too much of the problem is handed back to us as consumers when we, me included, as editors in a system. My whole job is about getting you to buy more stuff. Like, if you don't buy a new pair of shoes every couple of months, I then don't have a job, and potentially you won't have a job. So there is this kind of strange tension when fashion brands try to lecture us about sustainability, because if they truly, really wanted us to be much more ethical in our choices, none of us would have a job. And I think there's an inherent tension in that is very exciting, that I wish more people would just deal with and embrace, but we don't. But I think, this idea of archives and I think, why so many people are buying secondhand clothes, they're sort of telling themselves that it is a more sustainable way of doing so. But also, I don't really believe that, because the rate at which people are shopping on Vestiaire or other websites, the shipping involved, all the stuff going around the world, where's it coming from? Where did it come from to begin with? How long are you going to wear it for? These are all really complicated questions that no one has an answer to. So I think it's too easy perhaps to say that wearing secondhand clothes or wearing archival clothes is more ethical and more sustainable. Of course, it feels like it is, but I don't really know whether that's true.
I agree with you. I think it's a very complex and twisted issue, because as you said, if you want to be sustainable, just close your brand and don't produce. I mean, ultimately, that's what it is. There's another thing. I know many brands have reached a certain sustainability, and some of them I think genuinely, but if you look at the larger system, you cannot. For instance, I will give a very concrete example. Stella McCartney, which is known to be probably the most genuinely sustainable brand, with using sustainable materials, etc. So a couple of years ago, I wanted to buy a pair of shoes by Stella McCartney. So I decided to go to a store and not to buy online, because as you mentioned, the shipping is an issue. So in New York, they told me, oh, we don't have it, order it online. I said, okay, I don't want to do that. But 2 weeks later, I was about to go to Paris, and I thought, oh, I'll buy them in the Paris store. I went to the store in Paris. They told me the same thing. If we don't have it in store, go buy it online. So I ended up buying online. So I received a box shipped from Italy, because as many luxury brands, it produced in Italy for good reasons, because they have all the craft and the industry. So it was shipped. So even though the shoes were sustainable themselves, but the shipping from Italy to New York is not. And they're shoes, so obviously they didn't fit. So I had to ship them back and get another pair. So even though the actual brand is sustainable in itself, but the system you buy, I know, Net-a-Porter or whatever, or My Teresa, there's also the rest you cannot control or don't necessarily control. So there are many layers, and you have to go, even though the materials you use are sustainable, there's the whole industry and the shipping and shipping back. And
you didn't design the system. I think that's the biggest kind of challenge we all have, is to redesign the system. That's your job.
Hi, thank you. How much was there a focus on the history of Gaby Aghion with her own ideas about presenting her own fashion and how she displayed it and how models wore it and how she wanted to present it to the world? Was that a focus at all? And I apologize, I haven't seen the exhibit yet, so it might tell me that there. And how did that factor in also in publication and photography and the exhibit?
That's a good question. Obviously, she was the starting point and the reason behind this exhibition. But at the same time, it was so challenging for me, because she was like the center of the show. I wrote an essay about her in the book, but she's very elusive. She was very much in the shadow, and intentionally, for many reasons. First of all, because she designed the first garments for Chloé, the very first collections, and we don't have them. There's no photography, no sketches, no clothes. So speaking of archives are never comprehensive. And for instance, the Chloé archive is comprised of about 3,000 items, but there are big gaps. For instance, from the first 15 years, there are only a few garments. That's why you see only these 3 beige brown dresses. This is all we have left. It's not the curatorial chose to just kind of, not show these early years. It's just we don't physically have them. So that was another issue. And she rarely gave interviews. She was rarely photographed after, the first years of her use. So she was very hard to kind of grasp. Also because she very much stayed in the shadow of Lagerfeld, And also because her role is so difficult to understand, because she was a sort of artistic director or chief of production, and also because of her entrepreneurial role, she's not clearly identified. So she was difficult to grasp. But in terms of inspiration, she was definitely an inspiration because she loved modernity, clarity, daylight, and simplicity. So that was kind of my aesthetics when preparing the book and the exhibition.
And in the publication, we have Leanne Shapton, brilliant Leanne Shapton, respond to the photographs, some of which you see here, of Gaby herself, because it was important for us to sort of, I was also telling Christina earlier, another curator here who worked on the show also, is we often in Archivist don't have sketches, or we don't really put drawings of, vintage sketches in, because it immediately dates the publication. It looks like an old thing.
I agree.
So that kind of trick of you may be thinking that this is a contemporary object is completely lost. So similarly, we didn't have any vintage or older photographs of her in there on purpose. We have these responses, if you like, from Leanne, which again add this other layer of complication. But I think what's wonderful but also sad is that, yes, so little is known really about Gaby herself. Of course, the family is still kind of adjacent to the brand and helped somewhat with this, but not really on a kind of biographical level. But it's kind of one of the reasons why this show is so important, to remind people of the woman behind all of this, and the woman behind the kind of perfume and the campaigns with the blonde girls running down the street. I think that's what's so fascinating about it. And also the gap in the archive, the biographical, the letters, all of that.
As you were saying, these
stuff.
garments were worn, so they would get used and thrown away. I think that's the reason why we have so little, especially from these early years, people actually wore these garments.
And only in the
They
last
get
couple of, I would say in the last 3 or 4 years, designers have been so aware of their archives and what to do with them and how to keep them and how to preserve them in a way that is, I think, a bit depressing, because it means in years to come they'll be just perfectly organized. No joy of walking into Shalayan's.
Kim Kardashian is also
basement.
archiving her garments
Oh, okay.
with labels. So.
Good for her. Well, of course she is, because it makes sense. But one of the first thing I ever wrote for Archivist with Jane was interviewing Shelley about Shelley's archive, really trying to work out this idea of what do I keep? Do I keep it? I don't have space. Does this mean stuff to me? Does it bring back memories about things that I've kind of worked through? And now I think you don't get any of that anymore. It's a bit like photography, how photography's kind of ruined this idea of a childhood, because every single second is documented. Whereas the only images that exist of my childhood, just moments that I looked happy, like no one took a picture when I was crying or miserable. Now I think lots of people have videos or access to images of themselves. And so there's this interesting kind of lie that archives can tell. And when they're so complete, I think you actually miss part of the context of what life is, that things get broken, things get missed, some things are important, some things aren't. And I think that's what our job is to kind of pull out those important things that people have forgotten.
Hello, thank you so much for the presentation. I'm interested, how does Chloé foresee future fabric/color trends influencing the future collection, particularly in the archival production and process of it?
What was your question? Can you say that again?
Like, how does Chloé foresee the future fabric and color trends, design and production of their products, particularly in relation to the archival practices?
I guess what the role of the archive plays. I mean, I guess we don't work for Chloé, so it's difficult for us to answer that. But I guess what is good or interesting for you to know is that when we started this project, Natasha Ramsey-Levy, it was her first season was about to start. So there were lots of things missing in the archives. So Jane and I had a real handle on the things that she was pulling and was going to use. Because archives now, in this sense, are used by designers and reference, which you do in the show. You're pulling out kind of this collar or this star pattern or this painting or this material is repeated. And I think that's one of the problems of fashion design today, is too much of it is self-referential, so that's why we're not really seeing anything that new. A lot of what we see is an echo of something we've seen before. And I think that's one of the issues when you do have a kind of fully functioning archive as well. It's kind of almost doing its job so efficiently, you then don't really need designers that are visionary. You could get someone in marketing to just chop bits together and make a new blouse. So I think there's something about the role of the archive in a design house that needs much more critiquing and unpacking. But in terms of it being, I guess what would be interesting is to know what Shemina, whose show is going to be in a month's time, what she's pulled.
I have the feeling it will be very heritage folk, but that's just a guess. I have no idea. But it's a good question, because what was interesting, for the book we interviewed all the designers, the former Chloé designers, about their experience at Chloé. What was interesting is that most of them really didn't know exactly the history, because actually the archive is quite recent. It was founded a decade ago. So actually only it started with Claire White Keller, who actually had an idea, but very little. The first designer to actually use the archive was Natasha Ramsey-Levy. And as you mentioned earlier, and you can see the garments I chose from her in the show, they kind of make reference to other garments that are in the exhibition. She did, for instance, this collection inspired by the horse collection of Stella McCartney. There's also this blue and black geometric pattern that is a direct reference to what Karl Lagerfeld did in the 70s, and that you can see in the first show. So she was really the first one to kind of go back in a subtle way to the archive, and then Gabriella Hearst in a more vocal way. She kind of referenced Gabriella Hearst, but that's because the archive has been founded and they know about it. And I'm sure now that this show has happened, all Chloé designer will be more self-conscious about who Gaby is, who the founder is, and the whole history there. It's now obvious, it's out there.
And also the growing of an archive is constant. I know they were still trawling eBay every single day looking for things, because a lot of I remember when we went, I thought, oh, we'll get the whole horses collection, we'll get all the Phoebe Banana stuff. And, they were like, we've got one T-shirt.
The banana T-shirts are big hits in vintage stores. I didn't know that.
Yeah, Y2K, it's back.
Maybe we'll take one last question.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your talk. It was really interesting. And I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things. And you talk about this idea about being anonymous. And it was interesting when you mentioned that you thought Chloé was a British label.
That was me, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. And I thought that was really interesting, because I always knew about Chloé's connection with Karl Lagerfeld, but I'd never heard about Gaby, the person. So I think that was really interesting, that she kind of kept herself as this, not anonymous, but kind of under the radar. And I think it kind of links really interestingly to the exhibition at the Met with Women Designing Women, where there's all this anonymous of women in the industry and how they work in the industry on many levels. And I was just really interested in, Dal, when you talked about my archive, because it's kind of taken on a life of its own recently, because it was in such perfect condition, but it's moved around the world. And now it's collaborating with the mice upstate. So it's literally, there's
Lucky
one
mice.
collection. Yeah, there's one collection that is, they love that collection, and they are eating it. But it's a bit worrying at the moment, because I'm talking to the Met about another part of the collection, and they haven't touched that one yet. So it's a bit like, leave that one alone. So it's interesting, because you get really, you're right about how you think about your collections and your archives, because it's very personal. And what it brings back is all those memories of, you can't pay the bills, you can't pay the sample machinist, you're really stressed, you have to leave your studio. So the clothes have this kind of marking points in your career. And now I feel like I'm looking at the archives in a very different way. It's like all the patterns were rotten because I'd left 2 boxes on the lawn for about 9 months, because I was just sick of boxes and sick of storage and sick of archive. And I could not be bothered to open them. But when I did, I found patterns that were so destroyed, they're so beautiful and totally unworkable. But now I kept them as pieces, I know, and I'm working on stuff with them. But it's interesting how people are now looking at their archives in different ways. So.
And that's what I meant about that the pristine patterns of J.W. Anderson in Years to Come and all of that stuff. As wonderful and as useful and as instructive as they'll probably be, they really do miss, and that's also what this book's about, the material history, the dog-eared pages, the kind of moth-eaten bits of clothes. I think that's what's so interesting, and that when you have a personal archive to store, the kind of limitations you have with mice and other things is a bit of a problem. Moths. Thank you, Shelley.
Thank you.
Unless you have your bonus question, I think that's a great place to end it for the night.
I think we're gonna, and maybe, I don't know, thinking, can I have one more question, or should we end? Okay, Q&A. There's one last question.
There's one down here.
Oh.
Hi, this is such a fascinating talk. I'm really interested in how you measure what is like the pieces that are damaged enough that they're beautiful and which are damaged enough that it really wouldn't make sense to showcase, because when people see this exhibit, they're expecting the clothes to be in pristine condition and might not like really be ready to handle seeing clothes that are really like manipulated and didn't end up like wearing well as art in the same regard as things that are like perfectly preserved.
Do you expect clothes to be perfect when you see them in a museum?
I do, because that's the expectation of how they usually are displayed, but obviously that's not natural for them to exist like that.
Were any of the things damaged that you worked
So it's an interesting question, because when we did photography, I really insisted with the photographer, please be very light with the retouching. You know, if there's something really annoying, you can touch it, but I don't want like stains or wrinkles to be retouched. Like I don't want like filtered skin that you see everywhere on Instagram. These clothes have had a life and I want to see it. So although in the end, I don't know at which level it went. I didn't have full control of all that. They're a little bit too clean, more clean than I expected. But in general, we try, for instance, you'll see in the exhibition book, there's an invitation that has some water stains, like very, very visible, but it creates almost like a sort of landscape. It becomes a bit poetic. But it really depends on, and it's the same for artworks. I think some stage of aging and life add some patina that is interesting. It tells a story. And also I think for old paintings, for instance, most of old paintings, they're better when they have aged a little bit. I mean, and many artists actually took that into consideration, and they said, I mean, there are many writings from artists saying like, this painting will look better in like 5 or 10 years, it will have settled down. So, but it really depends on the clothes. And, you know, it's like in terms of conservation, I work with different conservators for different artworks. For some artists, the work needs to be always pristine, clean. It's part of their aesthetic. I know many museum people don't understand, because now the ethics of conservation is to preserve as much as possible, like the age, and I agree with that most of the time, but it really depends on the artist, on the artwork, the situation. Sometimes there are different aesthetics depending on what the meaning is.
I mean, I think, yeah, as I mentioned, the Momu show, you should watch that, because I interviewed the curator a few years ago before they did this show, and she was telling me there is this Margiela jacket that now they have released images of, and it might be on display. But at the time, she was telling me that Margiela himself didn't want anybody to see it unless it was pristine, so they were trying to work out how to make it look like it looked 25 years ago, which in itself, yeah, is strange, because we have pictures. Also, I think that, you know, a lot of my work is about imagery and thinking about imagery. We have the photograph that shows us what it looked like perfectly. I kind of want to see the clothing when it's knackered, when it's tired. That's very British. When it's tired. I think there's something also. There is something deeply problematic about our search for perfection in everything. Like, it's really ruined how we all feel about ourselves in the mirror. It's really ruined our expectations of each other, of relationships.
The filters.
Every interaction we have is filtered in some way. And I think in fashion, a lot more people would be invited into fashion exhibitions if they were looking at things that they recognized. Another thing is, again, it's just that reminder of daily clothes. You know, think like the blouse, beautiful beige blouse room. Who would have thought that, how many are in there? 20, 30 in that?
They created from the 60s. They're from the 60s to today, 50 of them.
So 50 beige blouses. If I told you that that's what was going to be in that room, you'd be like, yeah, maybe I won't go. But actually, when you see it, there is this kind of wonderful Technicolor whoosh of, you know, tea bags, I thought. But they are just beige blouses, right? And I think there's something really wonderful in, that's the point of an exhibition, that's the point of curation, is to sort of reorganize these things that otherwise would just seem pretty dull, but to apply or remind or amplify the stories that are behind them.
Well, that's a perfect place to end. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.